We're going to talk about procedures. There are two types of procedures, subs and functions. They're basically units of code. We could take a look at what a sub looks like, but it won't make a great deal of sense as to why we are making a sub. A sub, as I say, is a compartmentalized piece of code which we can call. But let me show you a bit more complex programming, and you might appreciate the use of a function in this case, or a sub, but a function in this case. This is actually quite a nice bit of code to produce an email. It produces an email from a worksheet. You might want to just explicitly email that off. There are two types of email, as you might know. One is ordinary text, and the other one is HTML. This code here will enable you to send an HTML email. If you take a look, this is actually the function here. This function here has the function of converting the text here into HTML. And once it's placed, this code here is the code which produces the email. But you'll notice here that it says here range to HTML. Now that is the name of that function there, you see. What that means is that this code here calls this function, and we know what this function does. It converts the text from the spreadsheet into HTML. When it's done that, it returns it back here, the HTML, and puts it in the body of the HTML, and so on. Now, we don't expect you to understand all of this code, but we will be considering that sort of email application later. For the moment, the point I'm trying to make is that we have a function here, and once you've written the function and you know what it does, you can forget about it. You know that that bit of code converts text into HTML. So I hope you appreciate what a function does. It's a block of code. You give it a name so that it's a meaningful name. You know what it does, and you can tuck it away and sort of forget about it. Now, okay, so we'll now take a look at a basic idea of producing a sub, and I'm going to produce the simplest sub we can have. And you'll probably say, well, goodness, what's the point of making a sub? I can write this code in one go. Well, I'll show you what I mean. I'll start off by making a code window like that, and then I will introduce my code. Now, what I'm going to do is to make a sub here. If I type here, and notice as I type sub, and I'm going to give it a name because it's going to square a value, and I don't even need to put those on. Let's see, if I press enter now, it does it nicely for me. It produces the sub and end sub, you see. So that is our unit of code. And what I'll do, I'll just double click on this and drag it up here. In fact, that code should actually work. It doesn't, won't see anything happening, but that will call. We say call. You can in fact use the word call up here, call, and that calls that sub. It calls this particular bit of programming code. You can actually have the sub up here in front of that. That will still work, but conventionally we will put it beneath the call. So let's put some code inside that sub and see what it can do. Dim x is double, and x is given a value, and then message box out the value of x. Well, let's run it. And you see it just prints out the value of 9. What I'll do, I'll put a breakpoint here and single step, and that will call the sub. I'll just do an F8, and where will it go now when I press F8? It'll go here, and then it will dim the value, give it a value of x's, and then square the value, and then message box out the value of x. Fine. We can also pass the value to a sub. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say square and then a 3, and instead of dim x is double, I can put that in here actually without the dim, and that has the meaning. Now that has two meanings. It means dim the variable as a double, but it has another meaning. It means that that 3 will necessarily be transferred to the x, so we won't need this anymore. If you have another variable in here, after this another number in here, then if you wanted to pass two values, then you could have x is double, comma, y is double there. But we'll just pass the one value for the moment. So then we can pretty much do what we just did. I can run this program, and that should pass the value and produce 9 once again. Now I'll put a breakpoint here once again and then run it. Notice now if I press F8, it will go to this line here, x equals 3. Now that's nice, isn't it? You can see that the 3 has been passed. And then it takes the value of 3 and squares the value of 3. Now it becomes 9, and we can simply message box out the value of 9. Now a function is pretty much the same as a sub, but there is a difference. A function can actually return a value, send it back to where it was called, but a sub can't do that. So let me first of all just change the name of this to function. Now watch what happens here. This is quite nice as well. Watch what happens to this as I click away. As I click away, it makes this end function as well. Now whenever I have a function, I must use the function name as my last statement. So I can indeed put that equal to the value of x that I'm using, so that I could message box it and leave all that if you wish. But when I call the function, I've got to call it using an equal sign, and that's got to be on the right of an equal sign. And here's something a bit weird as well. Today's bit of useless information. That needs to be enclosed. If you're passing an argument, by the way, technically the 3 is an argument and the x is a parameter, but people just call them all parameters or arguments. They don't seem to bother. But I need to have that on the right hand side. It's what we call an r value. And so I've got my value of y. You always have equals when you're calling a function, sort of. I'll show you an exception in a moment. But if I now just make sure I've got y dimmed, and that should, well, I might as well, instead of message boxing out here, I think I'll message box out here and actually message box the value of y. Let's just see if there are no errors in there. That's fine, so that works. One thing I forgot to put in here is what the type is being returned. So it's as double is being returned. Now I should really put that in, because that means that this thing here is a double that's being returned. But the reason it worked, actually, if you leave it off, it thinks it's a variant, but it'll work, as you can see, as you just saw. But I'll put it in now. I said here that the function should be always on the right hand side of an equal sign. Well, it's not quite true, because I could actually message box that out directly if I just copy this and message box that. Then that should do exactly the same thing. So but in general, the function call has got to be on the right hand side of something. In this case, it's on the right hand side of the message box. Before, it was on the right hand side of an equal sign. Let's take a look at all the things that we need to know about a function. First of all, we use the word function. Secondly, a function returns a value, so that name of the function must be the same as the name of the function. We should always specify the return type of a function. The argument is passed in parenthesis, as distinct from a sub where you don't have anything. You just call the number. You can think of that as a variable. Think of that as 9, as a matter of fact. Let me just single step all of this. So message box, so the 3, if I F8, that should get passed to here, and you can see that's got the value of 3, and then we square it, and it becomes, but you'll see that square actually takes on the value 9. You can think of that as a variable in a way, and that now, you see, gets passed back to here, and that should have the value of 9. Now, because that is, we can consider it as to being a variable, we can make an algebraic expression out of it. We can multiply by 2 and add 3 and do what we like. If you run this code, you see you'll get the value of 2 times 9 plus 3. So you can use a function inside an expression. You can't do that with a sub. You can't put a sub in because a sub doesn't return a value, whereas a function does. It might be an idea to try this exercise at the moment. You're asked to message box out, get the mean of those two numbers, which of course is going to be 3. You need to pass 2 values, and it will need to be a function, not a sub. You might like to recall Pythagoras' theorem, how you square each side and then add them together and get the square root of the sides. Well, that's all very well. You can try that code out. Don't forget to dim z there. But I would like you to put that into a function and call the function and pass in to the function the values of 3 and 4, which is described here. That would make a nice exercise. Let's talk about passing ByRef and ByVal. This is quite a difficult concept. You might like to just bypass this part of the lesson and go on to the next section, and we can talk about you could talk about ByRef and ByVal later on. But essentially, it's the way that variables are passed to a function. Sometimes the variables get changed, and sometimes they don't. So let's take a look at the code that we had, and what I'll do is make an integer. Well, let's make a double here. And then we're going to pass. Now the difference in this case is that we're going to, I'll give that v a value equals 3, and the difference is this time that I'm going to call my function. We don't really need that, so we'll just, and we're going to actually pass the value of v. Now this is going to surprise you quite a bit actually. So if I now run that, that looks to me okay. So can you predict what the outcome is going to be? Well, it's pretty much the same as what we've been doing. It gives you the value of 9. Now take a look at this. You'll get a big surprise when I do this. If I run it, v has got the value of 3, then I can, it's 0 at the moment there. If I F8, it's got the value of 3. And then I pass the value of 3 here. Now the value of x is actually getting changed. It's 3. And now the value of x itself that you passed is going to get changed. Becomes 9, of course. There's nothing much different here at the moment, except if I run it, if I F8 again, and before I do that, take a look at this. Now, isn't this amazing? The v has actually turned to 9. It says quite clearly that it's 3, but take it from me, v has now got the value of 9, which is a little bit weird. So you have passed your variable v in good faith to x. Now x has messed around with it, and you've actually, your variable has increased. The one that you passed off in good faith has been altered. It's quite a bit hard to believe for the moment, but that's what happens. So if I F8 again, it'll jump out of the program and simply print out what we had. This value has been passed what we call ByRef. ByRef, if I actually type this in, that will make a scrap of difference to what I've just been saying. You can see that it's going to get changed. The variable v is going to get changed to 9. So you can see therefore that that was the default situation. ByRef is the default. What's actually happening in memory is that this is when you pass your value to this, these two memory locations for v and x are one and the same thing. So that when you change one, you just change the other. They're one and the same thing. Saves memory space actually, passing by reference. But it is the default. So in VBA, it's a bit of a dangerous situation that you're passing values and they're going to get changed by default. That means that it's passing by ref. If I want to avoid all this, I can put in ByVal. And that will make sure that that variable doesn't, the v remains 3. Let's see if that's true. If I run the program, v has got the value of 3, and now I pass it, but since it's passed by a value 3, okay, the x gets changed to 9, and so this will become, but look, if we take a look back here, v has still got the value of 3. So passing by val is like a safe way to do it. What you're actually doing here, you're creating two locations in memory. You're creating one for v and one for x. They're completely separate memory locations, and therefore if you change one, you won't change the other. So I'll just continue to run that, and that works fine. So in summary, if you pass by ref, the original variable will get changed if you change it inside, of course. If you pass by that's passing, will get changed by ref. But if you pass by val, it puts a stop to that and preserves your original value. Does passing by ref have any use? It seems like it's just dangerous, really. Well, yes, it does. A shortcoming of a function is that you can only return one value. What if we want to return more than one? Well, we can do it. We can make it look as if the value has been returned. Let me just try out this code here. And this code is going to swap two variables around. We've got a variable a and a variable b, and we give them values, and you all know that that colon just means as if you put two statements on different lines, and that allows you to put it on the same line. Then you want to message box out the value, and then you want to swap them. Well, I haven't written that swap code. It's going to look like something like, well, I'll do that in a moment. I'll just comment that out for the moment and just see what that code does. If I run it, and it prints out 2, 4 and 2, 4 again. Well, what I want to do is when it runs, I want to print out 2, 4, and then it's going to print out 4, 2 instead of 2, 4 again. So I want some code in here which is going to swap them around. Well, we're going to write a sub, and I'll call it sub swap and what we need to do to put in here is we want to be able to call the sub, the swap, and then in here I want some code which is going to swap them, but the point is I want it to be done permanently. So you might think how you need to pass those two variables here, how you need to pass them in order for the two values to be swapped permanently. So in the end your program will say 2, 4, and then it will say 4, 2. So I'll leave that to you for an exercise. I'll show you the solution, but you might like to pause the video to see how it's done later.